Good evening, and welcome to The Way Out Show. I'm your host, Dane McCarthy, broadcasting to you from FEMA Region 5, deep in the bowels of the United Police State of America. Today is April 25th, 2014, and Barack Obama has come out and on various fronts, we have the Asia difficulty right now. He just went to Japan and reassured the Prime Minister of Japan that America would stand behind Japan in case China starts pushing too hard to take away those controversial islands that apparently have been administered by Japan for quite some time, but now China wants them. Now, we have to put this all, of course, into the historical context. We have to remember that Japan was an aggressor against China. Hard to believe that that could have happened, but in the early stages of World War II, Japan actually invaded China and caused an untold amount of havoc in that country, untold numbers of deaths among the Chinese. And the Chinese have not forgotten. And now that China is beginning to flex its muscles in the 21st century, of course we knew this was coming for some time, they are beginning to they're wanting to sort of show their power and take over some islands in the South China Sea. And they're claiming that they are their territory. And America is, or not America, but the U.S. government is making the pledge that if the Trans-Pacific Partnership goes into effect, that Japan will have the full backing of the United States in a dispute. If a dispute arises over those islands, or I guess anything else, between Japan and China. And this is all part of the move that was announced publicly by the U.S. government to make a pivot switch from the Middle East to Asia. And this goes quite well with their plan of getting the global full spectrum dominance in place that they've been wanting to achieve in the 21st century, in the early parts of the 21st century. Remember, this is all gamed out ahead of time. These things don't just happen, but these big empires have people in think tanks and foundations, joint chiefs of staff and so on, and these powers behind the thrones of these various powerful countries that are working supposedly in the interests of their own people, American interests, Chinese interests, Japanese interests, European Union interests, but oftentimes they're really not in the interests of the people of those countries, but they are in the interests of the rulers and the elite, the power elite, the ownership class of those countries. It's oftentimes these efforts work to further the financial aims of the big powers. So right now, the United States and its allies are gearing up for a confrontation in Asia with the growing power of China. To me and to many other people, this seems ironic, since it's Europe and NATO and the United States and the other Western countries that have been empowering China for decades now by allowing them, encouraging them to build our products. How many times have we seen truckloads of crushed cars headed towards a seaport or a factory, which will crush those cars into cubes of steel, and those cubes of steel will be sent to China. Why? Because that's where the manufacturing is happening. And it's not necessarily good for the people of China, because there just was a report that came out in the last few days, just sort of detailing, and we've heard this before, but detailing how bad the environmental devastation is in China. It's just incredibly sad. Most, over 50% of the waterways and even the groundwater is unfit to drink. These are not my words, but this is essentially what the report is saying, that it's dangerous and to drink the water, and this is due to the unregulated push by the Chinese government to modernize China, to make it into the most powerful country on the planet, the most modern country. And it is indeed amazing to see the development that has taken place in China over the last couple of decades. They're using the maglev train systems, very elaborate, enormous modern train stations, whole cities built almost in the twinkling of an eye, it appears, modern skyscrapers, enormously complex and beautiful transit systems for cars as well as trains, airports, huge housing complexes, modern, landscaped, just all planned out with with the huge models. I saw one of the models in some video that somebody had access to, that they were talking to a U.S. journalist about how they were going to make this city, that there was nothing there, essentially just open land, and it was a major city going to be made. And they've done this in so many places in China, and they don't even have the people to live in these cities. They're almost empty, many of these cities. This is what they're hoping for in the future, and of course some people think that much of this building sanctioned by the Chinese government is just speculation. They're speculators. It's a bubble. It's a housing bubble, but which makes the American Western housing bubble in Ireland and United States look very small. But we'll see how it all comes down, and who's going to come out on top in the 21st century. The United States, of course, is also worried about Russia, and we're seeing Russia now a major hot spot. The government of Ukraine, which overthrew the elected government, is now apparently getting into a hot war with the more Russianized or Russian ethnic Russian groups in the various cities on the eastern part of the Ukraine. The western part of the Ukraine is more leaning toward joining NATO, the European Union. They want that. And the eastern part wants to stay with Russia. And what is the choice? It's not a very good choice either way. Both choices are not very good choices. And it's too bad that Ukraine even has to make that choice. But this is how the people feel. They apparently have more ethnic ties, and they feel more loyalty to their traditional Russian roots than they do to Ukrainian roots, which I guess makes sense because Ukraine was part of the Russian Empire for quite a long time, hasn't been an independent country for very long. And this is something that you need to build over time to get that sense of loyalty to your own country. Well, this of course goes against the general trend or the propaganda and the education that kids are getting, that adults are getting in the 21st century, in which globalism is touted as the new religion, as the new wave of the future. As if you're thinking of the future, if you're forward-looking, then you think of breaking down countries and then just having one world, one joyously interconnected world where people are able to travel freely, and there's one single currency and presumably one language. Of course, this has been tried before with Esperanza, I think they called it, but coming up with a universal language in which there would no longer be any language barriers between people. This sort of flies in the face of the whole idea of ethnic diversity, because this seems to be the opposite of diversity. This is homogenization, and of course the United States, the planners, would like to Americanize the entire world and imbue the various peoples of the various ethnic groups in all the varied countries in the world, imbue them with the values of the United States. What are the values of the United States? Well, you know, for most Americans, we might even wonder, values, do we have values anymore? Are American values, well, they don't seem to be very popular these days, particularly, and more people are feeling that, you know, American values are outmoded, they're old-fashioned, they're kind of maybe even racist or biased against minorities. Well, I don't know how true that is, because oftentimes I think of Hispanic people when they come here, and they embrace those values. That's one of the reasons why they came here. They feel that the United States has the value of freedom, for instance, the opportunity in the United States to make it. You can make it in the United States. You can break out of your traditional role. In a place like Mexico and many other countries in Latin America and South America, and as far as that goes, in Europe and all over the world, you have a very rigid class system. Think of India, the rigid class system that still operates to this very day, although it's been weakened in India, but they have it's almost that you're born into a class in many countries, India included, and you cannot break out of that class. No matter what you do, it doesn't matter. You're still, if you were born into the untouchable class, you will die that way, and it doesn't matter how rich you are, you'll still be an untouchable. And maybe people will give you, they won't, you know, they'll be willing to shake your hand and do business with you, but maybe if they were from a much higher class, like the Brahmin class in India, they might look down their nose at someone, no matter how rich he is, from the traditional untouchable class. The untouchables were the lowest class in traditional Indian society. We see the same thing in Great Britain. For instance, you have the upper class, the middle class, the working class, and then a lot of subgroups, and everyone is very easily recognizable by their accent. And you have, of course, you have the London accent, the East London accent, the North London accent, the South London accent. You have the Midlands accent. You have the accent in the north of England, which is more closer to Scotland. The Welsh accent. And this is called diversity, but it's also something, it's also goes against the trend in the 21st century of globalism, that everyone is the same, that there are no borders. And some people who are probably overly optimistic about a globalized world will attempt to embrace this and say that, look, how countries go to war, but if there are no countries, then maybe they wouldn't. Why would they have a motivation to go to war? Well, this is one thought. This is certainly one idea, that maybe if the whole world looked like the European Union, in which the borders are broken down, anybody can travel from one to the other. But if you look at the European Union, you'll see that they have all kinds of problems with unifying a group of countries into one superstate. because they're still very much defined as countries, and people get upset when they see a lot of people from another country coming into their country and sort of destroying or diluting their national, the sense of that we are a people. We are Germans, for instance. We are Germans. Germans have a traditional way of looking at the world, a traditional way of thinking. We have traditional food. We have a traditional dress. We have our mindset is the German mindset, and when we are invaded by thousands upon thousands of people from Turkey and other countries on the fringes of the European Union or outside of the European Union, some of these people get very unhappy about this. Now, there's a plus side to this too, because oftentimes people who are immigrants to a country, they're very ambitious, because otherwise they wouldn't have gone to the trouble of emigrating, and they tend to be motivated. They have high hopes. They're optimistic. They want to make it, and they're willing to work very hard. And oftentimes they do contribute quite a bit to a country. When we take a country like England, or just the United Kingdom in general, they had strong ties to India and Pakistan, stretching back a couple of hundred years after the British actually colonized India. And then this opened the door to the reverse colonization of not English colonizing England, but essentially Indians coming over and living in Great Britain, and then bringing elements of their culture to them, including food. And if you go to England, you'll see that in almost any big city, you'll have a wide variety of Indian food, and it's some of the best food available in England. The English themselves don't have a very strong culinary tradition. And the English like their traditional food, but most anybody else is not that enamored of it, whereas many, many people from many, many countries adore and love to eat Indian food. So, I mean, there's so many aspects to globalization. One of the most negative, the drawbacks to globalization, is that the idea of the firewall. A firewall would be used in a machine or a ship or a vehicle of some kind as a precaution to divide one area from another area, so that if there's a problem in one area, like a fire, then the firewall will prevent that fire from spreading to the rest of the facility, whether it would be a building or a ship or an airplane or a car. And so this analogy is drawn between countries, that you need the firewall so that if one country implodes, you have strong borders, so that revolution or civil war or invasion from some other country, or just whatever the problems are in that country, or could be financial collapse as well in that country, so that financial collapse will not spread. Whereas in the case of if the borders were porous, if the country's sovereignty and integrity had been compromised by, financial dealings that are just unrestricted between the countries. Let's say there was a financial collapse, then that financial collapse could very easily spread. And this is what we're seeing now, of course, and this goes without saying, that when you have a financial collapse in an important country, then because of globalization, it can spread and it becomes a world problem. And much of our financial system is propped up very precariously by a belief rather than solid, hard assets. It's a belief. People are speculating. Speculation, by its very nature, requires belief. You believe that if you speculate and you put money down on a particular asset, that you believe that that asset will rise in value. You have that belief. You have faith. It becomes almost a religion. So the speculators who are relying on their belief system to make them money, if that belief system starts to become corrupt or falls apart so that people do not believe in it, then you have a real problem, because the belief is eroding. And just like anything else, then the whole system begins to fail all at once as it spreads. As people start changing their minds, they would think, wow, maybe I better pull my money out of the stock market. I don't believe that I can make money in the stock market. In fact, I believe that I'm going to lose money, and maybe lose big money in the stock market. I'm going to pull it out as fast as I can and try to cut my losses. And so, there is no perfect system, but we live in a world in the 21st century in which you have to try to look at the way the systems interact, and try to understand, to appreciate the complexity of all the systems, and how the military affects the economic, how a military attack, let's say an invasion, might have less to do with ideology or fighting the bad guys than it is about keeping the spirits up of a demoralized people, or reviving the military, the industrial strength or the economic strength of a country. Because war is a tool that is used for many different reasons. Not just the reason that you would think. Not just the reason that we're told is the true reason by our leaders, by our leadership. We have to question when our leaders tell us that we are going to attack these people because they're bad. We're good, they're bad. They're the bad guys. And we need to eliminate them from the face of the earth. That may not be the real reason at all why a military action is taken. But one of the traditional reasons for a government taking military action against its neighbors is to bolster its own prestige among maybe its other nations. It may take a military action against a country or an area that they know they can beat, and really whip them soundly in order to make themselves look good in the eyes of some other country that they're competing with. Maybe their real fear is that another country will attack them. And so they show their strength by crushing a rebellion, let's say, in some part of their country, in some obscure corner. They choose some small group of separatists, let's say, some ethnic group that they want their own little country. And they said, we're going to crack down on these people and show them who's boss and show the world how tough we are. And maybe a leader like, a strong leader, he wants to appear strong in the eyes of the world. And so he gets really tough with these people and kills a bunch of them. This is why oftentimes these military adventures, this war happens. I was just hearing today that some guy was complaining on the radio that, gosh, if you walk down the streets of America, I'll bet most of the people that you talk to would not even be aware that America is at war. Or they wouldn't if you went up with them up to them with it, and you would say, "Is America at war? Do you feel like America is at war right now?" And they would say, "No, I don't feel like I'm at war. Are we at war? What do you mean? What does that mean to be at war?" And this is the state of affairs that we find ourselves in. And many, of course, people who really wanted to make a point and understood what may be an idea of the definition, legal definition of war, is that no, we're not at war because you must have a declaration of war according to the Constitution before you can actually be at war. And there is no declaration of war that has to be approved by Congress, and there's a very definite set of steps that need to be taken before the country can go to war. And it's very sad that this is how war is used and what war is really about. If you're naive, you may think that war is something you do as a desperation thing. It's a last resort. I had a guy ask me, I was talking about the rules of war, and he said, "Isn't that an oxymoron, the rules of war? How could there be rules in war?" And I understood where he was coming from, but the sad fact remains that yes, there are very definite rules in war, and it becomes almost just another activity. And it shouldn't be that way, because for the people on the ground, for the people who are suffering the consequences of an attack by a military force, it is anything but a game. It is anything but a training exercise or a political maneuver, a strategy by the leadership. And it's just, it's heartbreaking when you have to look at the world and you see how cynical it is. And we know that, I think people who look at this, we know that most people understand that this simply should not be the way it is. But that's the world we live in. So all these things will continue, on and on and on. They've been going on for a long time. This is one of the arguments for just ignoring this. It's like, yeah, but this has always been the way it is. And it's true, it is always the way it's been. But there are people who, if they're not aware that this is the way it's been, will fall into the trap of believing that the reasons why we go to war are the reasons that George W. Bush gave us, or Barack Obama gave us, or whoever our president, or whoever the leader is. They fall into that. They believe we are under attack. We have to kill those bad guys. They hate our freedoms. They want to kill us. This is what the justification for the Vietnam War. They said, if we don't get those commies in Vietnam, you're going to see them in California. They will invade us. We'll be fighting them in the streets of America. And it's the exact same lie that was told to the American people after 9/11. It used as the justification. And look, they said, look what happened. They did come to America. We were right all along. They came right to the heart of America, to the financial heart of America, and they dropped those buildings in 12 seconds. And they could do that again. They have unbelievable technology from those caves in Afghanistan, and all they had to do was make that building drop, that building 7, and they just pressed a button and they made it just vanish, essentially, what they did. And if they can do that, think what else they could do. They could do anything they wanted. They could set off a nuke in an American city at any time. So the solution is we have to go to Afghanistan and blow that country up and destroy that country. And we also have to go to Iraq and blow that country up and destroy that country. And then we have to go to Libya, and then we have to go to Syria. Well, they actually stopped them when it's Syria. People just said, no, you're not doing it. You're not doing Syria. We're done. We're sick of it. We're tired of it. You're not going to Syria. And so they said, okay, fine, we won't do it. We won't do Syria. So they had to change their game plan a little bit. That didn't quite work out. So we're not supposed to think about that anymore, about how, because they had the plans all set. They were going to do 5 Middle Eastern countries, and they only did, 3? And they were going to get Syria and Iran. And now it looks like, who knows when they'll get to do Iran. They still want to do Iran, but it's like, well, I don't know if we're going to be able to do Iran. We'll have to go back to Iran and do it later. Right now, we're going to try to focus on Russia and surrounding Russia, because Russia's a problem. They're getting too powerful. Look what they did in Crimea. Now they want eastern Ukraine too. We were going to set up missile bases there to encircle Russia all the way from the North Sea or Norway, all the way down Turkey, all the way through, get the whole place covered. Set up in Afghanistan, get them surrounded to make sure that we are the dominant top dogs in the world. China, of course, the same thing. Now we're trying to work on China. How do we contain Russia and China? Never do they think that, well, maybe we should just, let them do their thing and not be too concerned about it. Let Russia do its thing. Just stay out of it. But that can't happen. That could never happen. So in a way it goes against their whole idea of globalization. They talk on the one hand about we have to break down countries so they don't exist, and then everything will be fine. On the other hand, they have to say, well, we have to protect our interests. And our interests are, and of course part of it is they play one against another. Both sides, they can see how they can make money either way. If they break down the barriers, then they have globalism. If they keep up the barriers, then they can get the two sides fighting for each other, with each other, whoever those sides would be, and they can fund both sides and make money on both sides and increase their power that way. And this would be, in reality, of course, the way that they operate. This is the only smart way that they would operate. In other words, no matter what happens, either way, whether it's globalism or really strong nationalism, they win both ways. This would, obviously, if you own both horses in a horse race, you can't lose, and that's what they want. They want to always play the game so they can't lose no matter what happens. So I'm going to just show you a short little clip that I found that I thought was very interesting. It's sort of a general overview of the last 10 years or 14 years, and just touching some high points to give you a little, and this is something I found on YouTube. So you can go ahead and roll that, and I'll shut up.
Bailout bill on the floor of Congress last week, Congressman Brad Sherman made a startling revelation.
Many of us were told in private conversations that if we voted against this bill on Monday, that the sky would fall, the market would drop 2,000 or 3,000 points the first day, another couple thousand the second day, and a few members were even told that there would be martial law in America if we voted no.
Martial law is defined as the rule by military authorities imposed on a civilian population. According to an article in the Army Times last month, the administration's threats of implementing martial law is not idle talk. In this shocking article, the U.S. Army admits they're bringing a combat team back from Iraq to continue their mission in America, and that this combat team will be assigned to NORTHCOM to assist in the event of civil unrest in crowd control through non-lethal weaponry. This deployment is of course in direct violation of long-standing laws known as Posse Comitatus and the Insurrection Act, which strictly prohibit the U.S. Army from policing American citizens on American soil. While such extraordinary steps toward the open implementation of martial law on the streets of America might seem like the Bush administration's last-ditch effort to keep the public in check while they rob the Treasury of hundreds of billions for their banker friends, it is crucial to understand that this is only the final stage in a careful plan that has been unfolding for decades through both Republican and Democrat administrations. Government plans to suspend the Constitution and effect martial law have been taking place behind the scenes under continuity of government contingencies first exposed in the mid-1980s and raised by Congressman Jack Brooks during the Iran-Contra hearings.
Colonel North, in your work at the NSC, were you not assigned at one time to work on plans for the continuity of government in the event of a major disaster? Mr. Chairman.
I believe that question touches upon a highly sensitive and classified area, so may I request that you not touch upon that, sir.
I was particularly concerned, Mr. Chairman, because I read in Miami papers and several others that there had been a plan developed by that same agency, a contingency plan in the event of emergency that would suspend the American Constitution. And I was deeply concerned about it and wondered if that was the area in which he had worked. I believe that it was, but I wanted to get his
May I most
confirmation.
respectfully request that that matter not be touched upon at this stage. If we wish to get into this, certain arrangements can be made for an executive session.
Urban warfare drills took place throughout the 90s, with American troops training with foreign soldiers to arrest and detain U.S. citizens.
What you're seeing is real. April 10th through April 20th in Swansboro, North Carolina. This has been repeated across the country in the last 2 years. So-called urban warfare training in America. Of course, in the case of Swansboro, they actually pulled people over and searched their vehicles with the local police department. A local listener sent me this video of the Swansboro incident. You see, they take out groups of young officers from across the country in the Marine Corps and teach them that it's okay to go into American towns and cities and take over the city halls and search vehicles. In this training exercise, it became real. They become so arrogant, they just followed their orders and began to search people's vehicles. And as you're about to find out, it's not just the Marines, it's the Army too, in Central Texas.
These drills quickly became reality, as in 2005 the National Guard was deployed in the wake of Hurricane Katrina to seize legally held guns from law-abiding citizens against their will and at gunpoint.
No one will be able to be armed. We will take all weapons.
Police department! Police department, anyone home?
All of a sudden, they were banging on the front door, the side door, and the back door. They said, let us in. I said, it's not even loaded. And I dropped it on the floor.
You got a gun?
Well, they punched me in the face. Look at my black and blue marks. Look at what they did to me.
In 2006, a secret government program came to light, which is recruiting clergy members to preach obedience to government in the event that martial law is declared. In 2007, the program was confirmed on CBS News.
If martial law were enacted here at home, like depicted in the movie The Siege, easing public fears and quelling dissent would be critical. And that's exactly what the Clergy Response Team, as it's called, helped accomplish in New Orleans.
Jeff, the primary thing that we say to anybody is let's cooperate and get this thing over with, and then we'll settle the differences once the crisis is over.
Such clergy response teams would walk a tightrope between the needs of the government versus the wishes of the public.
In a lot of cases, these clergy would already be known in the neighborhoods in which they're helping to defuse that situation.
For the clergy, one of the biggest tools that they will have in helping calm the public down or obey the law is the Bible itself, specifically Romans 13.
Because the government is established by the Lord, and that's what we believe in the Christian faith. That's what's stated in the Scripture.
And on May 9th, 2007, President Bush signed off on National Security Presidential Directive 51. This top-secret continuity of government plan effectively makes the president a dictator, allowing him to declare a national emergency for any reason whatsoever and implement martial law without the approval of Congress. The plan itself is so secret that not even members of the Homeland Security Committee in Congress are allowed to see its contents.
But now they've denied the entire Homeland Security Committee of the United States House of Representatives access to their so-called detailed plan to provide for continuity of government. They say, trust us. Trust us, the people who brought us Katrina, to be competent in face of a disaster. Trust us, the people who brought us warrantless wiretapping and other excesses eroding our civil liberties. Trust us.
These are just a few of the dozens of preparations that have already been completed to phase martial law in incrementally, bringing it about in stages, so an official declaration of military rule need not even be made. But if martial law is already a reality, what excuse will be used to turn the military against the American public?
Have you heard about this new thing going on in Great Britain that Al-Qaeda routing up all these Britons, essentially, 1,400 strong, apparently, in a new, what's being called a new white Al-Qaeda army. Tougher to detect, potentially.
Yeah, because they're not Muslims. They look just like regular British people. They're converts.
In 2001, Section 802 of the Patriot Act made any criminal offense, even misdemeanors, classifiable as terrorist activity. In 2006, the Military Commissions Act gave the executive branch the authority to declare U.S. citizens and residents unlawful enemy combatants and detain them in undisclosed locations indefinitely. And now, H.R. 1955, known as the Violent Radicalization and Homegrown Terrorism Prevention Act, currently awaiting passage by the Senate, will effectively outlaw dissent of the government, even on the internet. It seems the table has been set for those citizens who resist any government decree to be dealt with as terrorists by the U.S. military. And now that the banker bailout bill has been passed despite fierce public outcry, dissent has never been more rife amongst the general population.
Every nation in every region now has a decision to make. Either you are with us or you are with the terrorists.
Okay, there you have it. Just a little bit of an overview, really just touching on some high points. We're really stretching all the way back to the 1980s. Of course, it's way more complicated than that, and this video has a few years under its belt, so it's really not completely up to date, but it gives you sort of the general idea about one of the aspects of some of the major events, the trends in the 21st century. And of course, we'll see where it all leads. Just a little while ago, I guess most Americans watched on TV the confrontation between the old-time rancher, Cliven Bundy, out in Nevada, and his friends and his supporters facing down against the BLM, and both sides were armed, although I think that the BLM probably had the ranchers and their friends pretty heavily outgunned. And this is about Cliven Bundy believing, and he's believed this for decades, ever since 1993, I believe, when the grazing fees were first instituted, that it was wrong and he was going to refuse to pay the grazing fees. And so the BLM, I guess, decided that they were going to move in and get tough with him and bring in the armed military assault people, and they took some of his cows. These are free range cattle, and his family has lived on this land since the 1870s, and they've always had the right to allow their cows to run free and graze on the public lands. And so this is a long-standing dispute, and it almost came to a violent conclusion, but fortunately for everybody, the BLM backed off and decided not to open fire on the ranchers and their friends, and which might have turned quite bloody, I guess, because, like I said, both sides were armed. Well, now it may not be over. This is what everyone's saying, is that I don't know what Act 2 is going to be of this drama, but Cliven Bundy has just decided, and he's an old-fashioned guy, his views are very old-fashioned, that this is as far as he's going to back off, and he's not going to back off anymore. And he's an older guy, and sometimes old guys get this way. You almost reach a point when you're in your 60s, and I'm 64 myself, where you just don't care anymore. You feel like you've lived long enough, and by God, you just don't care if you're whatever happens to you. You'd rather just go down, with your back up, standing upright, than just give in and just sort of crawl to these people who are keep pushing you and pushing you and pushing you and pushing you. This is, of course, the way that typically governments go, and it's, again, nothing new. They have a tendency to want to accrue gradually over time more power, because they believe in what they're doing, and they think that they feel that they're right, and that they feel that they should be allowed to have more power, and they could make the world a better place if they just had the ability to do it. And their hands, they don't like the idea, the government agencies don't like the idea of the American people tying one hand behind their back or preventing them from accomplishing what they think, what they fervently believe will be in the best interest of everybody. And then this is a very optimistic way of looking at it. The other way of looking at it is that over time, the government bureaucracies, like the BLM, get corrupted, and those sociopaths and psychopaths who love power gradually get more and more power the longer the bureaucracy exists, until they are the top dogs, they are essentially in control, and they are, by their very nature, ruthless, power-hungry, lacking empathy, and they want to do whatever it takes in order to increase that power, and whatever it is they want, whether it's money or power, and they will do anything, because they're ruthless and we have no conscience, to get that power. And so you can look at it both ways, and both ways may be true, that there may be a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and maybe a lot of something else that's going on. We try to look into people's minds and hearts, and what are they thinking, and what do they want, and what do they fear, and try to figure people out. What else can we do if we're going to understand people, but try to look at what makes people tick. So this is where it stands now, the Cliven Bundy thing. I think a lot of people think that if there had been a shooting that happened at that incident, in that desert, that Nevada desert, that may have set people off all over the country, and it may have really changed things, and that may have been the trigger that would have set off the martial law that the little video that I showed you was talking about. They've been training for this for decades, and this is again, they're looking for a reason, a pretext to really crack down on the American people. I just saw an ad in our local newspaper, a full-page ad, or it wasn't, I don't know if it was really an ad, it was more like a public announcement, in which it talked about what you can expect is going to happen if a crisis happens at the university, at the town. And it talks about Alice, alert, lockdown, information, and then there's two others, and there's something else that starts with a C, and then escape. Alice, A-L-I-C-E. And the lockdown, of course, is the scary part. It's all scary to me. But you see how we're supposed to get this in our brains, something easy to remember. Alice, are we supposed to think of Alice in Wonderland? I don't know. But it was very strange that this is what we have actually come to. For your own benefit, in the case of a crisis, you are going to be under lockdown. What is lockdown? Where does the term lockdown come from? Is this something that they just made up? No. No. Lockdown is a prison term, and what happens in lockdown is that if there's some kind of a crisis at a prison, then all the inmates are ordered into their cells and the doors are locked, and that's called lockdown. And so we've already had a lockdown situation right here in this small town, more than once, I believe. I think a lot of people didn't know what was going on. It was just confined to the town. But if something really did happen here or anywhere else, you will find, just like we found in the aftermath of the Boston bombing, a lockdown situation of the entire town. And that means, just like in the video, you will see military police, or not military police, but militarized police, and also military acting as police, so you get both happening at the same time, patrolling the streets, entering homes without permission, knocking down doors, forcibly removing firearms from people's homes. You saw in the video the police officer who basically knocked down the old woman. They didn't show all of the video. She had a revolver in her hand, a very old revolver, and he just freaked out and just knocked her to the ground. And then, of course, it showed her, she said she was bruised. And, I mean, this woman was old. She had to be in her 70s. And I think that was absolutely unnecessary to do that to a little old lady who was just simply showing that, and this is during Katrina that this happened, and she wanted to protect herself, and she had a little handgun with her just in case somebody would break into the house and try to steal her stuff or beat her up or something. Instead, she got beat up by the police for having a gun that she was going to use to protect herself. So this is what we can expect, and this is all part of the police state, I guess. You saw the cover of Newsweek magazine proudly announcing the police state in America as a reality. I think most Americans, we think of Nazi police states when we think of police state, or the Stasi, like in East Germany, or the KGB in Russia. And well, we don't know where it's going to go, or if it's ever going to come to something like that, or maybe 1984. But time will tell. We'll find out one way or the other. In the meantime, we can just, with some amusement and bemusement, sort of, scratch our heads and just wonder where this world is going, and whether we feel that this is in our best interest or maybe not in our best interest. I guess that's something that everybody will have to decide for themselves, and just basically go on and see and watch it. That's what I'm doing. I'm really feeling that at my age that I'm not even going to attempt to try to change anything, but just sort of look at it from the historical perspective. And as I mentioned, and this has been going on for a really long time. I'm reading a book by Paul Kendall called Richard III, and it's a classic work. It's a very well researched, not a novel, but a history of the life of Richard III. Now, Richard III, was made the most demonic villain by William Shakespeare in the play, the very famous and excellent play, Richard III. And it turns out, according to Paul Kendall, now Paul Kendall was a professor in history at Ohio University. Most people don't even remember him, but this guy was world-class guy. And he wrote this amazing book, which really showed how he was the last Plantagenet king, Richard III was. This is in the 15th century. After that, the Tudor dynasty took over, and they wanted to show him in the worst possible light. So they used their propaganda machine to create a story of how he was lawless, ruthless monster, ogre, who was also deformed, had a hunchback, was a deformed, lame. His hand was all... This is apparently not true at all. There was no deformity in Richard III. In fact, the complete opposite. He was a reformer. He tried very hard to do the right thing as a king, and he was maligned by history. This shows how history is created. It's a war against truth, my friends, that it's happening, and it's always been happening. And it's for those people who are interested in truth, it is their pleasure to try to delve and discover what is really going on in the world. So that'll be all for today, and I hope you have a wonderful weekend and sleep well, friends.